Exceptional Randos shows produced live in front of a captive audience of 3 cats and a dog. It's really cold outside. I mean really, really cold. But that's okay, because we're inside where it's warm. For now.
Well, that was random. Exceptional radio.
I mean, it's a balmy 274 degrees Kelvin outside.
So I'm still going to advocate that the chipmunks are better at telling winter than the groundhogs.
Oh,
Chipmunks have not emerged yet.
100%. I haven't seen any chipmunks. But aren't groundhogs just like Titan or gargantuan chipmunks, though? I mean, like they're like
maybe, but
elephant
chipmunks
chipmunks.
are squirrels, but squirrels aren't chipmunks.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So it's one of those like taxonomical distribution issues.
Yeah, which is where I'm like, I don't know if groundhogs are chipmunks. If that's the case, then they would also be squirrels. But
I think back in the 1800s, they would have just called all of them a marmot, but that's just like a blanket. I don't know. We've got at least one groundhog that chills in our yard from spring through right up to the end of fall, and that thing will eat like clover and leaves and stuff like that, and it doesn't actually mess with the garden, I've discovered.
Groundhogs are in fact squirrels.
Ooh.
Also known as marmots, as you were saying.
They're just like chunky squirrels. Extra giant.
They're one of the largest member of the squirrel family. Scary day.
Man, they've got giant fucking teeth too. Like, you can see those things from space practically. They're always like kind of yellowish. Probably speaks
Yay
to
for
their
science. Science is so consistent. But it's actual science. And not fucking Joe Rogan pseudoscience.
Hey, now we know. Now we know. I bet there were some
Well, and it's
pretty
like
impressive.
we always knew. It's just confirming, and that's the beauty of science. It's like when you follow the rules and you go with like what you know in terms of what you're taught, it's usually consistent and it works.
Oh, wow. Just imagine how repeating a process can be beneficial. It's crazy like that. Lately, I've been going through the process of outlining what I see in today's podcasts, like various podcast channels, like production methodology, the way that switching occurs between various camera angles. There are a lot of new podcasts out there that are pushing like one or two or even maybe 3-person production so far. Like, I mean, some of this stuff looks like it looks almost like broadcast grade content. And it's so impressive because that means that the cameras are getting better, the lighting systems are becoming more accessible. The audio end of it is pretty much resolved. Like I haven't touched our audio system in. Hold on, let me look at the date. 11/22/2020. So back in November of 2020 was the last time I had to make any adjustments to our audio. This stuff is pretty much like turnkey nowadays. It's actually kind of interesting and kind of relieving. A lot of the decisions have been made. There's like a formula for how to achieve really high quality production. And so then it really comes down to content and then the delivery, of course. How likable is the host? How engaging is the host? And how good are they at making me not feel like I'm at a sales pitch, but that I'm actually consuming some kind of content? Because when it comes down to it, most, if not all of these videos are trying to sell something.
Yeah, it's really bad anymore.
And it sucks because sometimes they put that commercial like right at the end, right before they actually finish telling you, all of the things. And then that's the off-putting part. Like if YouTube could just highlight, oh yeah, this is the commercial section of the video. If you skip this, they won't get to monetize. You won't be helping that person monetize, but this is where it is. And then the audience can decide if they want to actually help monetize a channel and be, participants in the system beyond passive consumption. Because that's kind of what's already happening with the like button, but it's a little more difficult to pinpoint where in the video offended the viewer.
Well, it's really weird anymore in terms of monetization. So like for YouTube, for example, one would have to follow so many rules to stay monetized, but to get monetized, I think you have to have at least 10,000 subscribers and like 1 million views. There's like this really high wall. I mean, for a podcast like us, it's like a really high wall to get over. But for like a production team, they can do it in a couple of months, if not a shorter amount of time. So it's like getting an investment to create a YouTube channel is, I think, a lot more difficult now. But in like 2016, 2017, people were investing in those channels.
Yeah.
So you get the like Mr. Beasts now. And it's because a bunch of people just gave him, well, he came from a rich family in the first place, but a bunch of people gave him money to like develop the channel. Whereas like, as you're saying, there's a low bar of entry or low barrier of entry for high quality sound, but actually getting an audience is, you almost have to have a production studio before the algorithm's going to let you through. and there is definitely like a hurdle. If you're not going to pay to get through it, you're going to have to break through it in terms of attrition. And that obviously takes like investment on the side if it's like a production team that hasn't been monetized yet. So there's a really crazy you also see people who think that they can jump into it and start monetizing and, you know, create these home studios, not realizing that like a home studio, yeah, you can get good quality, but you're actually not going to be able to break through the algorithm. So it's just going to be another podcast in the sea of things that never get listened to.
Well, that's a really good point. One of the things I've noticed about the podcasts that have not just have extremely high production for audio and the video and the content, but these are also directly tied to commercial studios that are actively recording artists or actively like post-production studios that are working on larger projects, and this is their weekend decompress thing that they do, and they share the secrets of the universe type thing. And so there really is it's a very large barrier, in fact, but it's invisible because the barrier to high quality production is low, but good luck translating that to an actual commercial entity, because the world is in fact a very, very competitive place. And it turns out that none of this stuff is it's not a meritocracy. It's absolutely pay to play. And it works for some people. There are breakthroughs. There are some people who have their Mr. Builder channel, Mrs. Builder channel, gardening, whatever, and they have, you know, years and years of just gardening or fixing things, and then all of a sudden they have one video that goes viral, and they get like 1 million views in a day, and all of a sudden that one video just launches them into YouTube spotlight. But that's actually really rare. It only seems like it happens because we see all of the ones that launch into fame. We never see I don't know how many users YouTube has. I imagine it's like hundreds of millions.
Well, and how many of them are actually real at this point? And that's like another issue, especially the more AI starts to proliferate in terms of people actually applying it. It's like so much of the internet is bots.
It looks like they have 2.5 billion accounts. And if the what was the percentage of bots running the internet? Most recently, like 60% of the internet's bots.
Yeah, I think it was like 60.
So if 60% of that is bots, then we've got like what? 12,
a little,
15, 1.5 billion bots on YouTube. So
it makes sense. I believe that.
Yeah, so we've got 1 billion actual users using YouTube. 1 billion users, and you know, we get breakthroughs all the time, but breakthroughs are counted in like, you know, double digits. Double digits out of billions. YouTube. I mean, that's like worse than Publishers Clearinghouse.
Right. Well, and because it's so difficult for people to break through, I wonder how many users stop coming back, because there's been a lot of points where I'm like, man, I'm never gonna go to YouTube again, and it's like I'll not go back for a few hours, and then I'm like, I'll cave and go back, but there's only so many times that's gonna happen, because the reasons I'll like start to swear off YouTube is like they're not suggesting new content in terms of like a lot of the stuff will be over a year or 2 years old. They'll suggest stuff that's like 7 years old or 13 years old, and I'm like, surely there's newer content that's more relevant to me. And then I'll like say, not interested in this content. And then they'll suggest some more old shit. And it's like, I can't, for whatever reason, get the algorithm to suggest new content that's also relevant to me specifically, unless they push some like Joe Rogan, Jordan Peterson. And then once that starts getting through, then I'm realizing that like half the stuff that's in my suggested for you isn't stuff I'm subscribed to. So then I'm like, why am I subscribing to things if they're not going to actually suggest those things to me and then try to give me something else that's like those things, but effectively replacing the person I subscribe to?
Oh man, you gotta like clear not just your internet history on your browser, your local browser, and your internet cache, like at the system level. You also have to go into like Google's history and delete all of the videos that might have any kind of tag related to whatever's giving you the suggestion crap, because those things are loaded with, I mean, all of the tags that pinpoint to whatever dumb shit that they keep suggesting. Like, just because I watch a video of Steven Seagal being Steven Seagal and I find it amusing doesn't mean that I need an entire page of suggestions of people and their disambiguation of insert terrible kung fu, not even related to Steven Seagal. Like, somehow Steven Seagal points down the rabbit hole of terrible kung fu analysis, and that's not even, after a while it gets pretty boring. Especially when it's the same thing over and over again. Like the same video clips over and over again.
Right. There's only so many times you can hear about Steven Seagal shitting himself or being made to shit himself. And it's like, if you click on one video, it's going to give you an endless supply of the same story told by different people. And that's where that's okay, that's fine. But if you click on an exceptional Randos video and play it to the end, then you're getting suggested Joe Rogan stuff. We have 5 years of content that it will literally never suggest somebody another fucking exceptional Randos video if they play it, as if we don't have any more content, as if the person who just listened to 2 hours of our show isn't going to want to hear more. No, give them something else. Like, it's so inconsistent if we're not going to pay them or if we're not going to follow their
by the end of this year, we'll have 600 hours of content.
Well, and we don't follow their monetization rules because we're not trying to get monetized. So then it doesn't actually suggest us because we have curse words or we have like things in our podcast that will get flagged for COVID misinformation, even though we're not ever fucking pushing any anti-vax bullshit or anything that's like anything remotely misinformation that should get flagged. So it's like,
seriously, we're like one of the most, we're so pro COVID like vaccination that it's kind of actually, it's I think it's the way it's supposed to be, but I'm pretty sure there are people out there who are still like, come on, the pandemic's over, get over it. And it's like, no.
Right. Oh, they're definitely out there.
I want to live forever. I'm a fucking like super avoider. I have avoided this shit for 3 fucking years. I'm not going to change my behavior to make someone who's already comfortable with, being predisposed for a stroke or an aneurysm or any kind of cardiovascular complications later in life. They're cool with that shit. I'm happy for them, but I'm not cool with that shit. That stuff's like still a threat that isn't even really discussed. COVID, like somebody gets COVID, they're predisposed to an entire like a litany of horrible shit later in life.
And apparently not even later. I guess like some young people are showing signs of dementia after having contracted COVID multiple times.
Well, yeah.
Like they're like in their 20s.
Yeah, because it's a hemophagic fucking virus that destroys vascular tissue. Like, where else? We have vascular tissue everywhere, including our brains. And our brains are like one of the most delicate structures that we have. Like, oh yeah, like what happens when you deplete or deprive like the brain of blood? Oh yeah, it suffers. Like really, really suffers. The whole thing was so casual, and I think it's there were a lot of people who were at fault. It never should have been treated so casually. The flu shouldn't be treated casually. There's like a incoming avian flu that's affecting mammals. Like this stuff is really, really serious. And not to get too more, but there is a bacteria that is living in pigs, and like at some pig farms, and it's resistant to like our most powerful last line antibiotics. I think like a year or two ago, a woman in Pennsylvania contracted it and she died because, lo and behold, there are no antibiotics that can fight it. There are no bacteriophages that can fight it. There are no like viruses that want to kill this bacteria. So like we're really kind of getting pretty close to the a place where being careful is, actually the best thing for us. And then we get, backlash about being careful. Like somehow being careful is not a good thing. It's just like, oh, that's some sky is falling shit. Can't win. And there's money involved too. So of course, there's a motivator that can't overcome some people's desire or ability to protect themselves from this stuff. I was reading about during the first year of pandemic when the government increased their SNAP benefits. There was an improvement like across the board in terms of people not needing health care because they were finally getting their nutritional needs met. And that's like has an extremely profound psychological benefit. So people's lives were actually improving because their diets were they didn't have food insecurity issues. And so now this stuff is going away because, the pandemic's over. Everyone can get back to work. We're also experiencing like the craziest inflation shit right now. It's like one hand doesn't know what the other hand is doing kind of situation, it seems, where there are measures or things that have been put into action at some point far enough ago that we're not really sure, like, hey, what's actually going to happen? Because they can't predict the future. They don't know like what will actually happen when this program ends. And the people who started the program or got the program moving along, they're not around anymore, or it's no longer their baby and they're not taking care of it. And now what? It's going to disappear. People are going to go hungry. They're going to go back into depression or food insecurity. Their kids may not be eating enough.
Yeah, imagine that. People have one of the basic needs met and they can have function. A better life. Yeah. Wild. Some communist thought right there. Well, and it's like you see the difference between Republicans and Democrats. It's like Democrats are like, or I guess left-wingers want to give kids free food to eat, and then Republicans want to like put kids to work. It's a very stark contrast in this country between it's not the whole like false equivalence of the two sides thing is it's so
it's a self-defeating argument because
it is. That's exactly what I was going to say, but it's also capitulating to the right-wing attack on left-wing ideals that comes from taking ideas and redefining them in a way that is not originally aligned with what they were intended to be, so that they can be attacked as a straw man. And further, the false equivalence of the two sides is that. So that's why it's self-defeating, because the left wing didn't come up with it. The right wing came up with it, and the left just doesn't do anything about it. And it's like the same thing with woke. You see the left or the right wing attack on woke, and the Democrat inability to stop the attack or even push back on it. And this happens on many fronts, whether it's like healthcare, the Second Amendment self-defense framing, women's rights. Like everything gets taken and framed as, oh, you're pro-choice, you're pro-murder, you want to murder children. And then it's like, no, that's not. Well, and the Democrats never do anything about those kinds of double think newspeak attacks that the right wing constantly launches. And this is where it's like, if the left wing was really on their shit, they would do the same thing back, if not more. It's just they want to act as if the notion of left wing has to take the moral high ground in a way that also doesn't allow them to actually push back against the right. Once again, a planted idea.
That's some,
of course, the right wing's
that's some really
that
old school, high class. Like, I won't even dignify that remark type bullshit. Like, not responding to it. It's like it's gonna somehow put them in some kind of shield of inviolability. Like, all it really does is secure the base of the accuser. If the person remains silent, they're not even willing to defend themselves, well, surely they must be guilty. Does our society even have a checks and we had checks and balances on the media at one point, but is that even does that idea even exist? Can it even exist anymore?
Well, it seems like you'd have to have a media literate public for that to even be feasible. And we've gotten so far from a media literate public that I don't know if that's such a thing that's possible. And this gets back to the Joe Rogan, I question everything, therefore my question is as valid as this scientific published paper. And it's like the idea that anybody can just ask a question and upend any sort of research or data that's been put forth simply because they figured out a question that's not explicitly put in the thing that they're trying to deconstruct.
That's like the person who is just stumbles into a 500 level lecture and asks a 100 level question.
Exactly.
And,
that's exactly
and
that
demanding
person.
that their 100 level question be taken as seriously as the requirements of the course, the prerequisites for the course would have answered those questions long before they ever set foot in that classroom. But somehow they managed to get into that class.
Mm-hmm. And further, if you don't answer that question, everything you've said is not relevant now because you can't answer that question. And that type of anti-intellectual attack on authoritative knowledge has been perpetuated across people who not only have never gone to graduate school, I don't know if Joe Rogan even finished college. So I don't think he did not finish college. So you have people who are trying to deconstruct higher, graduate school processes that haven't even finished undergrad. So they have a complete false sense of how graduate programs work based on undergrad experience that isn't even complete undergrad experience. And you have perpetually that type of anti-intellectual people gravitate towards it because then it allows like the YouTube University degree to be more valid. And it's just an echo chamber of like, I don't actually have to read anything. I don't actually have to like research anything in the proper way, because as long as I do it in the pseudo research way, my echo chamber gets reinforced and everybody in the echo chamber thinks that the other person's right.
I don't think that self-guidance through supplemental information will ever equal the kind of gains that one would make through guided program. Like from somebody who actually has completed not just like a graduate level course, but has achieved sufficient education to actually, I think that's what I call it, profession, or professing as a professor. And that's not to say you can't learn from somebody who only has a master's degree or only has finished undergrad or only has, no degree. You can learn things from anybody. But, I think it's important that, especially if people are going to question everything, that they're aware, or at least make an attempt to aware of how advanced is their question? Has this question actually been answered? Did they bother to search the forum? Of course not, because nobody reads the forum rules or the suggestions or the stickies at the top that say, hey, this is how you use the search function. Your question may have been asked and answered numerous times. It's impossible to keep up with some forums, though. Even like the really like hyper-focused industry forums where they only talk about one thing. Because there are millions of questions.
The issue also is like people used to fucking lie through their goddamn teeth about how much they read.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like some of them would admit that they weren't reading everything in terms of like it's not necessarily crucial to read every line of every piece of text. But in some cases, you can't just read the introduction and the conclusion and have absorbed what's the knowledge of a document. And there were a lot of people who would have like these massive libraries and make it seem like they had read them, but it's really like, skimmed at best and attempted to learn through osmosis at worst. And I think there's this disconnection from what it takes to actually be that monastic, dedicated to constantly reading person versus like someone who owns a bunch of books and just like pretends to like have knowledge by proxy of having the books available or in their
that's just
physical
That's
proximity.
a librarian.
Okay, it's not a librarian. No. Here's the thing: a librarian never pretends that they know the contents of all the books in a library.
Oh no, they just know how to find.
A person who is pretending to be intellectual by proxy of having their books available is Captain Nemo.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? And this is where there's this element.
I was just thinking in terms of like the person who has a lot of books on hand that even if they know how to search the index.
a good distinction in that, like I said, no librarian if a librarian has like a 9-story building that they are a librarian in, you're never going to find a librarian that would ever act like they've read every single book in that thing.
Never.
And has all the information accessible in their brain.
Never. No.
That's not the person I'm talking. That's like an actual perfect juxtaposition against the person who has that library and is like, oh, I've read all these books. And you're like, it's physically fucking impossible. It's physically fucking impossible that you read all these. But those people exist that will act like they've read all those books. And that's where I mean, for a long time, people didn't have the ability to call bullshit on it.
Yeah.
But now it's hard for people to tell when they should be calling bullshit because there's been so many of those knowledge by proxy people that it's difficult. Like a degree doesn't guarantee that you've read the books. And people know that, so then they call bullshit on every degree, but that's not the appropriate response.
I was actually just thinking about like almost every book that I've had for a class, there were explicit sections that were not covered through the programs. Like they just either they don't have time to get to it, or they've decided that that section is no longer relevant. Sometimes it's irrelevant, like they just don't need to cover it, and I get that. But there are some books that I remember only consuming like 2 chapters out of, and that's it. So yeah, I've had plenty of books where I didn't read the whole thing. And then there are all the books that I'm pretty sure I read through, but I can't remember a damn thing about. Like there's some literature out there that's very engaging and quick paced, and you end up reading 100 pages in an afternoon, and it's like, whoa, wait, what just happened? Holy crap, that was amazing. But that's different. That like literature that's supposed to get you absorbed and forget what's going on around you. That's magic. Textbooks and information, books containing information aren't supposed to be like that. You're supposed to retain that information if you read the context.
Which often takes more than one read through in a way that prose or any sort of like fiction doesn't necessarily do.
Yeah.
And I think that's also where the notion of somebody who's able to read something and absorb it the first time is like, yeah, that person exists, but they're the rare one in terms of like, especially new information. Like it doesn't even have to be math, but anytime somebody's taking in new information, like for example, history, getting a historical account of events accurate in one's mind is probably going to take more than one read through. But the idea that somebody can just like read through like a historical account of the Battle of 1812 or something, or the Battle of Gettysburg, and immediately absorb it, it's like, no, fucking bullshit. But people, again, used to frame it as if that's how things worked. And then a lot of regular people or even above average intellect people would feel bad because they're not absorbing information in that fictional framing. So I think that's why a lot of people don't enjoy learning, because whether it's through media or through people who are lying, learning is made to seem a lot more easy than it actually is, in terms of whether it's new information or learning how to do something like through reading. And it's like, learning how to do something through reading that's like a physical exercise almost takes even more attention and time, because it's not just like a video, it's translating words to actions, and there's like a level
of the brain's abstraction layer.
Yeah.
Oh, that's, you raised a good point. So I've been using a product family from a company called Line 6 for the last 20 plus years. And I remember the first manual that I read page to page, probably a dozen times or more, was, actual thick, like thick enough that you would hold it and it's, more than a deck of cards thick. And I've had subsequent iterations and new versions of this type of device over the years, and with each device I have to read less and less of the manual, because it's a maturing interface. More than anything, it's like an environment that has changed very slowly over time, And so to me, having used it for such a long period of time, it's very familiar to me. And then similar devices from other companies they all have a similar paradigm to a lesser extent, and they all have their eccentricities and quirks, and that's fine. A lot of those things they're all kind of adjacent to each other. But then there are some devices in device families like synthesizers where the Roland language is vastly different from the Korg language and the Yamaha language in terms of how to use their sequencer or how to build performances or patches or any of these things. And sometimes those things are so vastly different that it's like learning a whole different like theory of how to make music in a sense. And that stuff can be challenging. It can be really challenging once you hit that first roadblock. And I guess I understand why. Like, I understand how it's easy to think, oh yeah, I've got a Super Blaster 9000. Now I can do all these things, because presets. But actually understanding the underlying theory and math behind it, that stuff can take forever. I mean, I've read about people who spend their entire graduate studies focused solely on frequency modulation. That doesn't sound very fun to me, but there's some super sound design nerd out there that's their thing, and more power to them. I can only imagine how much they've actually read and how much math they've actually done, because it's like way more than anyone can like see on the surface. And I think that applies to anyone who's gone that far in education. And so like the idea that like some twerp on the internet can just be like upending somebody's like presentation, or just because they don't understand what's going on, that's actually that's like, man, they'll just let anyone in here now. The doors are wide open. There's supposed to be a filter, though, right? Like, not everyone gets to go to university. Some people go to a state college or a community college. Some people get to go out of state. Some people get to study abroad. Some people's education is completely paid for by, like, the quality of their output. Other people are legacies, and other people have, loans and grants. It's not an even playing field for sure. Even though it pretends to be like a meritocracy, like education is not a meritocracy.
Not at all. In terms of, then you have the Lori Loughlin's who can
fucking pay their way through everything.
Yeah, and in the process basically prove to the anti-intellectuals that the degree isn't worth anything because rich people can pay their way through. But for the person who had to take out loans to actually do the work, their shit got devalued with no fault of their own. So that's where, to me, the anti-intellectualism that America is displaying, it's only going to hurt America in the end, in terms of like, it's not happening everywhere, but the lack of media literacy in tandem with the anti-intellectualism, in tandem with the rich people who fake their way through and pay their way through, it's like everybody's buying their own bullshit in a way where they think this is the Elon Musk think that you can just buy and throw money your way at things and solve the problems. In the meanwhile, things don't go the way they were meant to go. And that's what's happening with Twitter. That's what's happening with the economy at large, in terms of, you see these banks fucking failing left and right, and these tech companies failing left and right. Fucking Facebook cutting 10,000 more people. Fucking Microsoft downsizing. Fucking all these companies have grown past their point of diminishing returns.
China's finance minister issued a warning that U.S. Interest rate hikes could trigger financial risks and volatility in developing markets. And so China's central bank is like, hey, we need to like prepare for, some fucked up shit. I think when China's central bank is concerned about our economic activity, like to release a statement about it, that's actually a bad sign.
Oh, definitely.
Like normally the stuff I read from China is like all internal to China, and occasionally it's like foreign interests are fucking with us. But this one's like, hey, our money is about to get messed with, guys, so brace for impact. I'm pretty sure I read another article recently that there are, hundreds, if not thousands of like mid-sized regional banks that are all they're all under threat right now. They're all suffering. They're all in the same conditions as SVB before SVB's collapse. So this is kind of nuts. Meanwhile, the government's trying to ban TikTok again.
Well, and Donald Trump is trying to rile up his supporters into fucking rioting if he gets arrested on Tuesday, which is hilarious. It's too cold out for his supporters, which is and he's been deplatformed enough in a way that this story about him trying to get people riled up is reaching more people than him.
Well, it's cold out, and if his true supporters come out, they only reveal themselves. So, I mean, those are the most hardcore ones. Like, if they go out in the cold, like, if they're willing to go out in the cold, we know who they are now. That's pretty easy. It's just like all the idiots who decided to walk around with tiki torches in protest. They all got like put on some giant list. Like every one of them was identified, I'm pretty sure. I mean, facial recognition technology is totally a thing, especially since everyone and their grandma wants to be able to open their phone just by staring at it, which has got to be the dumbest security measure that's ever been implemented on a mobile device.
Yeah.
Those things can be spoofed with pictures.
Yep.
Fuck. Microsoft wants to do away with passwords altogether. They want it to be like location based and associated with like multiple devices so that it can like triangulate who's what and where and stuff like that.
Well, I'm done with fucking Microsoft security because they keep forcing stuff on their user that nobody asked for. So I just like turned off my like all that shit because this gets back to that same shit where it's like, man, stop changing my shit or else I'm gonna stop using it.
Yeah.
And
I don't like I don't like the rando production environment machine just display preferences changing because I changed something on a different computer that happens to be signed in with the same account because I set it up that way at one point. Then I end up going back through everything individually and disabling shit that I shouldn't have to, because you'd think that if it was all synchronized, disabling it at one level, you could issue the whole like, hey, turn this off across all systems. But no, once you disconnect that system from the whole like, let's share all of our settings profile, the other ones are still connected to each other, so they don't give a shit. They're like, oh, bye, dude. At least like Mouse Without Borders doesn't do weird crap like that. Like if you change a setting on one of them, it changes it on all of them.
It's been one of the most stable pieces of software I've ever used, and it's like,
and it's Microsoft.
you know, but I feel like it's a subdivision that they probably have open sourced or some shit, because that seems to be the most stable anything Microsoft ever does when they stop associating money with it. As far as I can tell.
Yeah, I think it's like a Windows Garage or Microsoft Garage. So it's like a startup type thing inside of it's a sandboxed division that exists just to create stuff.
Yeah, that's what I figured.
And so I don't even think it's been updated very much, other than to remain compliant with like the updates to Windows 11, because it works between Windows 11 and 10 perfectly, and all my changes on any machine are reflected immediately across all machines. So yeah, it's been the most stable Microsoft software I've ever used.
So it was created by an indie developer, Truong Do, and it looks like it was basically Microsoft like signed a deal with him.
Oh, so that's why
I'm not sure.
That's why it's good. Is because it wasn't even developed by Microsoft.
Yeah, exactly. That's that fucking tracks. They didn't develop that shit.
Well, that makes sense. Yeah, the best software by Microsoft is clearly not developed in-house. They bought it because that's what Apple does, and that's the smart thing to do. Buy the best available solution, and then bake it into your system. If they would just bake mouse without borders into Windows, so it was just like a preference, Microsoft, you guys can have this. But yeah, that would like totally be the best damn thing. But then again, maybe we're actually special users who have multiple systems physically next to each other that we want to control with one mouse and keyboard.
I think yeah, that's part of the case, but the only people who should have these computers should be us, and that's the problem. Is they're like making it seem like a person who's just gonna fucking surf Facebook and YouTube needs a like $1,500 PC, you know, and that's where I'm like, that's the issue. Is all these overpowered PCs are being put in the hands of casual users, and then making them feel like they need to become power users in the process. They just become ADHD monsters, and that's like the actual result of people getting overpowered machines, and not like them becoming more productive.
So recently I acquired a 6th generation iPad on eBay for like $100, and it runs the current OS and all that stuff. And I got it so I can control 2 guitar amplifiers that allow me through software control over Bluetooth. And it's a lot easier than going through a tiny interface, a little tiny screen, and pushing a button and rotating a knob over and over again. And it's doable. You can do it with the one button super knob situation, but it's a lot easier with a tablet. So this one tablet, I've started using it for casual internet consumption, and I can use this thing to stream a movie to my TV in the living room. And lo and behold, my computers now are being used less and less for casual interneting. And it's actually really cool. It's like the coolest thing. Being able to take an article that I want to read into a different room and just sit in a different chair or sit in a different place, just become comfortable to read, as opposed to sitting in front of the computer like I'm working, is a vastly different experience. And I don't think I would be comfortable with a $1,500 computer just to read Google News. That's like way overkill. There are a lot of things that tablets solve. Like for a long time, I thought it was like a solution to a problem that I didn't have. And it turns out that the problem that I couldn't even tell was I was using overpowered machines for casual consumption.
Yeah. Yeah, you sometimes that shit ends up making it worse.
Yeah,
Like,
you find software on your workstation. It's like, wait, when did I put this on there? What did I even put this on there for? And it's like, oh, hold on, why is there something on my workstation that I don't even know what the fuck it does? And that's when I realized, okay, this is something's wrong. I've let the party move into the work environment. That's not good. I wonder if that's even like a check and balance. I think one has to have multiple machines, and they have to have them for a production environment for that kind of scenario to emerge, though. Or you have to have like an actual dedicated, like high-powered, like computer system that you've built for the purposes of like high-end gaming to actually end up with something like absurd. Like, wait, what's this even here for? Is this for some hardware? For years, I didn't know what the Vulkan software package was. And so I would uninstall it, and then it would reinstall it. I thought it was a virus, and then finally it's like, oh, this is a gaming thing. Oh. Oh, duh. Because I wasn't using that workstation for gaming. But I wanted the video card to render out, waveform information. So it is possible to end up with stuff that you're like not really aware of what it is or what it's for, and just keep on keeping on. Because I never experienced any problems anytime I uninstalled it, but every time I installed new drivers, there it was. This is a long time ago. This is like when I was in my 20s, I think, or my late 20s.
Well, it's hard to know, like you said, if you didn't install it, but it's part of a package, it may be necessary for some other shit, and it just looks extraneous. I try to keep my extraneous apps as minimal as possible, but I've deleted some shit on accident that's rendered the machine like inoperable. So that's where I am very hesitant to, like, even if I don't know what it is, I'll double check before I delete something, in terms of like, yeah, shit's just too risky.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. There was a time when I was really brazen, and I would just enter the registry all willy-nilly and, following instructions, of course, trying to optimize the system. And there were times when, when I'd convince myself, like, yeah, this makes things better. But then all of the time that I spent, like, chasing down problems or reinstalling things or putting registry entries back, or I was just tinkering, really. I was like trimming at the fringes for optimizations that really wouldn't even have mattered. And now, like, there are no real optimization guides for any of this stuff. As long as you get the right hardware and that's compatible with your software, everything works for the most part. Unless you're trying to get some really crazy old, like, some legacy hardware to work with. Windows 7 drivers. Is that far enough back to be weird? Windows XP drivers. Because no one wants to use Vista drivers. But something like that. Like, I can see that posing a problem. But I don't know. I haven't looked at modern motherboards lately. Do they even include old PCIe slots anymore, or is it all PCIe now?
Yeah, like most of them don't, or not necessarily most of them, but
you have to get like a really high-end board to include a PCIe slot now, right?
Yeah.
Man. Like, my workstation only has full-length PCIe slots. It doesn't play. It's just like, no, we can't use that shit. But, I know that there's still older hardware out there that's probably still good. Like, stuff that was top of the line a decade ago might still be good, because a lot of our technology hasn't improved. It's just become more cost friendly to manufacture. I don't know though. I don't have any old hardware that I want to keep alive, so it doesn't really matter to me. Maybe
I'm just frustrated because my Bluetooth stopped working on one of my machines because Windows decided to push an update, and now it's like Intel's hardware or Intel's drivers aren't working with Windows, and it's like it's shit like that where I get so frustrated.
I think that happened to me actually. I had a little Bluetooth dongle, and everything was fine. And then I did an update, and then everything was haywire. And then I uninstalled it, and everything is fine again. But now I'm hesitant to run the next update because, like, is this just going to break everything again? And that's on my casual use computer, nothing special, no production environment at all. Like, now it's like, do I really want to tempt fate with an update that could wreck one of my production environments? It says it's like a critical update. I mean, neither of these computers have Bluetooth dongles on them, so I'm not too worried about it, but still, like, who knows what it's going to actually do?
Yeah, you can never tell, man. That's again, it's so frustrating. And that's half the reason I don't update my shit is because, like, with NVIDIA even, sometimes you update the drivers and then the card works worse.
Oh man.
Or whatever.
That happened to me too. At the beginning of the year, I updated my card for the first time in like 6 months, and everything was just like it wouldn't go into 4K. It was stuck at 1080p, and it wouldn't even do like 60 hertz. It was stuck doing like 30 hertz, and so I'm thinking like, well, this is not right. So I tried a different monitor and I tried a different cable, and nothing changed. I had to roll back my drivers, and then I waited a couple months, and there was a new driver, and then everything was fine. But it was still like what the hell are they even doing? Are they even testing their shit? And I don't go for like the gamer channel, the one with all the stuff that's still kind of being developed. I go for the studio package, the one that's supposed to be stable. Like, I don't know. I think the whole video card market is still recovering from mining.
Oh, most definitely.
Like,
most definitely.
I don't think there was ever a reason to have updates at such rapid intervals, except to satisfy mining. And none of those improvements were for gaming. They were just to help churn. Or to mitigate churning, or to prevent people from frying the cards while mining. But, I mean, I think all it did was make things... It made it easier to appreciate how similar like a 2060 card is to a 3060 card, or a 1660 card to a 2060 card, really, even though one does not have ray tracing and the other one definitely has ray tracing. Like, I think it really kind of puts the spotlight on a lot of the games are not able to be appreciated because of the games themselves. But we have this incredible hardware that can do just amazing things. But I'm not sure that hardware is ever going to be fully realized. Like a 4K stream, if you watch like the entirety of Game of Thrones in 4K, that's like a terabyte of data.
Yeah, holy shit.
It's huge. And so imagine watching an entire season of something in 8K. That's 4 terabytes of data. I'm not even sure like if that would accurately stream. I know that there's some 8K videos on YouTube that I can't watch because I don't have an 8K monitor. But that's a lot of bandwidth requirement. And I'm pretty sure that there's no way to give everyone that kind of bandwidth right now or in the foreseeable future without putting down like the most monumental fiber optic infrastructure that hasn't been conceived yet.
Well, I know ours got upgraded to fiber a few years ago, but they didn't give us the proper modem to take advantage of it. So I think a lot of people are being sold the notion of them having fiber internet, but not actually getting the benefits of it because they're not getting the right modem. Because they're not going to tell you immediately if you don't have it. They let us sit without the proper modem for a year. So like you're saying, I think their infrastructure isn't going to be able to actually provide everyone the access that they're claiming. So they have to basically fake it in some ways in terms of they'll install the fiber lines, but not then distribute the modems so that people won't be taking up the bandwidth at the same time.
So my parents' neighborhood, they're laying fiber in that neighborhood right now. They've been doing it for the past several weeks. And I think my dad said that he is kind of interested in seeing how fast is it kind of deal. But like you said, are the modems available? Are they going to even make how quickly is the service going to be deployed? And in theory, I could get Smithville fiber to my house, but it costs almost twice as much, and I don't get the same bandwidth that Comcast, for whatever reason, gives me. Somehow Comcast's wired network is still rock steady to a lesser extent. Although it would be nice. I'm not going to lie. It'd be nice to have gigabit or gigabit up and down. So full duplex gigabit Ethernet would be freaking dope. But
it is. It's good when you actually get it, but that's where we were paying for it for a year and getting 300 up and down, and it was oh, that's good. But once we got our actual modem, it's oh shit, this is what we were supposed to have been getting. Which again, I'm not sure how many people are going to be able to know the difference to then call the companies out on it and then actually get what they're supposed to be or what they're paying for.
Yeah.
Well, in the process, we got they definitely made up for the year of not giving us as good a service. They dropped our rate for the next year to what we were getting. What the actual if we were paying for a gigabit, and we were only getting 300, they retroactively gave us credit for the 300 level.
Oh, then that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to remind them at some point in the beginning of 2023, they put a filter on my line because apparently there was some ingress. So I changed the line, and now my speeds are not quite the full 800 or 900 megabits per second downstream that I'm supposed to get, but I'm definitely getting the full 20 up. So maybe they'll retroactively or give me a prorated.
Yeah, they might
prorate,
especially if you have an option to change.
Oh yeah. No, at the end of the year, it'll come up and they'll be hey, your year-long agreement is up. It's time to renegotiate.
Well, I mean, if you have an option to switch companies and you companies that deal with cable really respond to the threat of leaving them if you have an option, whereas some places don't. You'll find if you when we lived on Henderson in Bloomington, we happened to be on this line where there was actually no competition for internet, and we had to go with Comcast because AT&T stopped serving our neighborhood 2 blocks over or something. And then it was
you got to pay 10 grand for that last mile of service.
Well, they wouldn't even give it. If in terms of once they installed the fiber, I'm sure that part got it. But when we were there, it was this line that Comcast and AT&T agreed not to cross over for each other or something in terms of Yeah, you just didn't even have the option to switch companies. Whereas here, there's like AT&T, Direct TV, Comcast, fucking Smithville. So you can threaten to leave. Whereas, like, again, it sounds like you're in a place where you can threaten to leave. And they generally, if they've also been overcharging you, they will compensate. And that's like, they don't want to lose a customer, but they also don't want you to talk about it.
Yeah.
Because then other people will start raising flags, and it's like, yeah, they do anything to keep people from catching on to their shit at large.
Huh. Well, it looks like Smithville only actually wants $15 a month more to exceed what I'm getting from Comcast. Huh. But then I probably have to rent their modem.
Right. But that's the leverage you can use to get them to drop the price for you. Because it's like you don't want to switch. They don't want you to switch. So they'll work with you. And I think that's where there is still some level of like the consumer being able to, it's not even really haggling, and it's like almost not even really negotiating so much as like getting the companies to pay or to give you the best product that they possibly can at the best price that you should be able to pay. And that's like, that should be out the gate in this country. Like that's the whole point of laws and like better business bureaus and shit like that. But ultimately then you have to like jump through these hoops to get the best fucking download speed, get what you're actually paying for, and then not be like overpaying for something that you're not getting. So, and it's like, I know it's happened to me. I'm sure it's happened to you, or it's happening to you now. It seems like in a certain way. And it's like, if it can happen to us, it can happen. It's probably happening to most people. If not, like, nobody wants to take like the call or the extra steps it takes to make sure that you're getting the exact internet download speed that you're paying for. But in the process, nobody necessarily does the math to say, oh, if I'm paying for 100 megs and I'm only getting, or if I'm paying for like a gig and I'm only getting 100 megs, that extra cost over the course of a year, over the course of multiple years adds up, and it's completely not what you're paying for. So it's like, it's one of those invisible costs that when you make it more efficient, you're like totally realizing like, oh shit, my speeds are better. Nothing's stuttering.
Well, I think the issue for me is that like they proactively put a filter on my line. It wasn't because I said, hey, I've got some issues with my service. They did it because they finally got around to doing their jobs, but their job isn't to fix my problem and then take the filter off. It's just to put the filter on. And then they have to rely on me to tell them, hey, what the hell's going on with my service? I think that's the real issue. Is they've created this kind of like positive feedback loop that enables them to not do anything. Because it's incumbent upon the subscriber to provide the final blah 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 da checks and stuff. It's like, look, I'm tech savvy as all else, and when I say I have no problems with my internal network, it is absolutely from the wire into the modem. That's from there. That's the problem. Like, and they can't actually fix my network. They're not allowed to touch my network because it doesn't belong to them. They can only take it to the cable modem. My cable modem works, but they're not going to, even if I fix everything, they're not going to come out on their own. They're not going to proactively check up on their work. I have to initiate that through some kind of customer service call. But they're the ones that created the conditions in the first place because it's their cable network. It's a terrible cycle of frustration.
Most definitely, yeah.
Like the guy that came out to my house, he's like, "Here, I'll just give you some cables." Like, okay, I can fix this part. Can you come back out and like take care of the rest? He's like, "Oh yeah, give me a call. I'll come back tomorrow." I did everything. I connected and I called him up. I was like, he's like, "Oh, we're not responsible once we leave the call." It's like, you lying sack of crap. What's going to happen is I'm just going to end up calling them again, and they'll send some different technician out, and they'll fix the problem. But I shouldn't have to go through all that. Like, especially when they are the ones who are responsible for their network. And I'm paying them for the privilege of doing their job for them. Maybe that's America, where you get to pay for the privilege of doing something for the company that's providing the service. Or maybe that's the internet, really.
Well, and in that's one of the signs of like constantly having to protect yourself against like exploitation or like getting something put in a place where you're like paying for it repeatedly and then not getting what you're paying for and then stuck in a contract that is heavily weighted to the other entity's benefit. And there's been a lot of states that give the opportunity for unequal contracts to be created. And even in terms of like corporations being given personhood definitely puts individuals at a disadvantage when going against a corporation in terms of having the law protect their interests. But this gets back to the notion of like, these people have believed in capitalism so hard that they would assume and believe that a corporation has their best interests at stake, when legally the corporation is its own person and is meant to take its own personhood as the highest goal of importance in maintaining that, even down to now the onus on a return to the shareholders is above any individual customer to that entity. So that's where the laws being meant to protect the individual, now also protecting the corporation against the individual, is that same right-wing double think applied to legal protection that it's going to hurt them too in the long run. And it's just a matter of like, they're just not good enough at math to realize the long-term detriment is not worth the short-term benefit. That's like a repeated problem with this country. And a lot of it has to do with them not only not learning history, but the lack of learning about logical thought and the anti-intellectualism in tandem. So I'm not even really pessimistic in terms of like, there's got to be the other, like coming out the other side of the tunnel on that. But it is difficult being in that, what's a clear descent towards like the bottom of what this economy is going to be. Like watching it happen is not necessarily fun. And so it's not like I'm like cheering on the collapse of the economy or anything like that. It's more so like, it's definitely happening, and there are people who are acting like it's not happening. It's just more what has to occur for a significant portions of Americans actually recognize it and then start responding to it instead of trying to keep operating as if nothing's going on. And that, the same shit happened with COVID.
I think that just points back towards media literacy. We can't, and collective memory of a goldfish, not to disparage goldfish memory, but but if the collective consciousness can't remember what happened last week, then asking them to remember details about the last really serious economic downturn and the economic conditions that led up to it, or the previous one, all within the last 30 years, then actually I'm not even sure if media literacy would help with that. There'd have to be some kind of historical literacy involved too.
Yeah.
And economic literacy and math.
So yeah, that's where again it does, that we have a Democratic president right now. We're not openly in a hot war, even though there's definitely a proxy war happening in Ukraine. And the economy's like in this weird free fall where even like the most stable tech company is laying people off. I don't know, like going into an election year, that's not great for Biden, but like, I don't think any Republicans actually going to want to inherit that. So there's this thing that happens with presidential terms in terms of like inheriting the previous president's problem is not something people want to necessarily do. And they'll frame it like, oh, we need, if we start a war, then the person who started the war should like continue to be the president. And it's not even necessarily that so much as like, you don't want to be the president that has to come in and pick up halfway through somebody else, or a third of the way or a quarter of the way through somebody else's war that they started, and come in with the exact opposite frame of mind to then have to then still deal with the consequences and repercussions of being in a war that you ideologically do not agree with. And that's where, whether it's the war or a war or like Affordable Care Act, things like that, where it's like, for example, if Obama passed the ACA and it didn't go into effect until the next president's term, the next president having to deal with the fallout of that is not something that someone on the opposite side actually wanted. So that's where it became a point of like, I'm going to deconstruct this because the incoming president did not want anything to do with those previous presidents' legislations. And that's where, again, not to say that, like, the fact that Joe Biden ran on only wanting one term makes me not want to support him into a second term. But the issue is, I know the Republicans aren't really going to offer viable competition in this second term because it's actually better for their next presidential candidate if Biden wins this election, and then in their minds, it's 4 more years of quote unquote failed policy. And that would be enough to galvanize a real Republican contender the next time an election happens after the upcoming one. So that's where I'm like, I don't even imagine. I feel like DeSantis. He's not winning nationally. He's not. He's not old enough to beat an old white man. Ironically, so
I think Nikki Haley is going to be the one that poses the biggest threat to Cheeto.
And she's too. Oh, he's not running. He's definitely not running.
Yeah, but I mean to his base.
I mean not for the Republican Party.
Yeah,
he may try to run as an independent, which would only be worse for the Republicans.
Yeah,
which is why I think they're going to probably discourage. They'll pay him not to run as an independent before they let him run as an independent. So that's where I'm like, Nikki Haley also not going to win nationally against an old white man. She's definitely not going to beat an old white man, especially when it starts coming out that she's like not really white.
Oh, she's also she's ageist. She was like saying there should be like
she's
mental competency tests and like all these things that are essentially like clearly outlined as like, no, that's like actually unconstitutional. It's like written in the freaking Constitution.
Well, and this is where again there are things about like her and DeSantis for specific examples that make them not viable national candidates, that if they end up running, it will be to lose.
Yeah.
And that's where I'm like, I'm not putting it past the Republicans to run like when they ran Bobby Jindal, he was run to lose. They knew he wasn't going to fucking win. That was like to galvanize the next election. And they're totally willing to sacrifice lambs who think that they're getting the support of the Republican Party, like Ben Carson. Oh, yeah, he thought he was getting support, but he was meant to galvanize the racists. Like, if you see a non-white person in the Republican Party and also, like, them talking about anti-woke stuff, it's actually going to, like, be a double negative and result in the racists showing up. So there's this thing of, like, I've seen the way that they play, and they're really good at unorthodox strategies that end up resulting in what they want. The left wing is not good at those specific things, which is also why I think in terms of like the predictability, like, yeah, they're probably just going to run Joe Biden again in 2024. He'll win because the right wing is setting him up to win. If, like I said, there's certain things that, again, if it's DeSantis or Nikki Haley, yeah, they're being run to lose. And a lot of Democrats or centrists would not admit or acknowledge that and would think that it's like on the power of Joe Biden's first term that he would win. But his first term wasn't that great. It was like just slightly better than nothing. And that's like good enough to get him a second term. But it's not actually the best he could have done. And it's not what he's reneged on almost all of his campaign promises at this point, including the student loans was like the biggest one. So he's always been playing to the like old white people who may be Republican, they may be Democrat, but they can't not prefer an old white man. And that's why, again, it's like DeSantis is not going to beat Joe Biden with that specific demographic, Republican or Democrat. Nikki Haley's definitely not going to beat that demographic, or beat Joe Biden with that demographic. So that's where I'm like, it's hard to know if Joe Biden is trying to whitewash his legacy or if he's actually trying to implement socially just policies. And that's where I'm like, I'm not about to give him the benefit of the doubt and assume that he's like actually a social justice warrior. And I'm going to assume that he's just trying to like be more appreciated by history and not be seen as Jim Crow Joe by the time he dies. So like, I'm not buying it, but they're not selling anything else at this point. Like, there's no real other left-wing front runner for president that's even being mentioned right now. So like, that's where I'm assuming they're just going to run Joe in 2024. I don't even know if they're going to fucking primary. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if they have to. But it feels like going into 2024. Well, I guess we're not halfway through 2023 yet, but the election cycle has already started on the right. It hasn't started on the left quite yet in terms of the public acknowledgement of it coming up. So that's where I'm wondering.
Where can they go from Build Back Better? Change, hope, build back better.
They put themselves in a corner.
Yeah. I mean, those 5 words almost make for like a decent hook for some pop music, but only for like an election campaign song. I think I'm just like too cynical for campaign slogans, though. They feel like actually, this is my problem with a lot of really like really basic airbrush and graffiti is that oftentimes like it's like one word can sum up the entirety of anything. I mean, I know that words have definitions, but I don't know. I realize that it's hard to put a lot of information into a yard sign because that's kind of the space they have to work with. A 24-inch TV. I get it. It's not easy, but it's really hard for me to see these things now and not just think like, oh man, all those things are just going to end up in a landfill.
Well, and that's again,
all the Build Back Better signs are in a landfill someplace. All the hope and change yard signs are in a landfill someplace. Well, some of them are in somebody's garage because they paid good money for that and they're not throwing it away. But most of them are in landfills. Every civil action campaign that had a yard sign, those signs are in landfills now. Even the ones that were like environmentally minded, those signs are in landfills right now. And they were all made out of oil. And they were delivered by planes. And we're shooting up satellites into the sky like every fucking week. And significant portions of them don't even turn on. Where are we headed? Where does all this lead us? This is like, some of it's so surreal. Like, what kind of dystopian fiction are we in? But it's not really dystopian, it's reality.
Well, and that, I think we've discussed the difference between 1984 and Brave New World.
Oh, yeah.
In terms of like, one is the extreme on one end and the other is the extreme on the other end. But do those even accurately describe what happens in an absence of media literacy in terms of like, those almost depend upon a level of media literacy for even the dystopias to get to the level they got to. So it's like, are we even capable of reaching those dystopian states because our media literacy is so bad? And that's where I'm like, it feels almost like the notion of like a Black Mirror or Twilight Zone episode.
That can't even happen anymore, can it?
It can't even happen, yeah, because
we've lost enough literacy for Twilight Zone.
We can't. It's like our dystopia is such a mentally stunted state that it can't even evolve anymore. It's like a petri dish that has only certain types of bacteria, but is also in an isolated environment in itself. So it's
like a root-bound plant. It can no longer grow any bigger because the roots have taken over the entirety of the structure that it occupies. It can only get enough nutrients to survive. It's in a torture state. That's what like bonsai is. That's torturing a plant. Oh man, that's even darker. We've reached a state with media literacy where we're essentially in a media torture chamber. That just reinforces the idea that humanity was placed in a prison on a prison planet because we were too violent. Forget Star Trek. How could we ever even achieve like a Star Wars level of society with where religion is still like the big name of the game? I think that's actually might be the reason people gravitate towards Star Trek, is that it still has a religion as the central focus of so many of the stories.
Well, didn't they not add that until Deep Space Nine? Because
no, they added that. The religion became a big component of Star Trek late in development, and now religion is like with the Picard stuff or with they mention it, but it's not quite as prominent as it ever got with Deep Space Nine. But Star Wars, man, that's like all Jedi all day long. And then even with Deep Space Nine, it was like state persecution of religion. Whereas Star Wars is like religion is the power behind all righting of wrongs and all in the case of the bad guys, it was also the source of their strength. But religion is like central to Star Wars, and no matter how much they inject religion into Star Trek, there's still quite a bit of objectivity and violation of the Prime Directive. But I think that's really just a mechanism to move stories forward within that universe. Because as soon as anyone mentions the Prime Directive, they're about to break it. Like every time, it's a countdown.
Well, and then that often calls into question the notion of, do the sci-fi stories that invoke religion actually end up being fantasy? And I think that's a lot of the cases. It's like,
oh yeah,
when you try to,
they have to magic it all up.
Yeah, and I think that ends up like, it doesn't undermine the science necessarily, but it does make it less scientific in terms of how things are being described. So I think that's like, what's it called? Battlestar Galactica, for example, is like one of those. The rework, they end up making it less science and more fantasy because of the incorporation of religious elements.
Oh yeah, the overlaps, the parallels between the human religion and the Cylon prophecies.
Yeah. So, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. So that's where I think
that moved the story forward, but it definitely made it less science fiction and more science fantasy.
But that's also why the media literacy might be important in terms of like why our science fiction has become so or become less science. And I think that's also where like when the story is trying to do too much in terms of philosophically examine science versus religion, that automatically starts to push the story away from science. And I think that's like an inherent issue, but it hasn't necessarily been addressed in a way that allows science fiction to stand on its own away from like an attempt to tell a philosophical story juxtaposed against religion. And that feels like because of the Joe Rogans, you know.
Well, you know, it obviously it needs more explosions that you can hear in space somehow, and more explosions. It needs more explosions, more lasers. One of the things that I've always appreciated about really good sci-fi is when something's happening that requires like everyone on the bridge of a starship or everyone involved in this scene, they all carry out their actions in a way that like simultaneously that all works towards the core of what they're doing. And what I've found in fantasy stories, and I'm going to pick on Marvel right now because Marvel's like they've kind of polished the roller coaster so much now that it's hard to ignore. But all of their sequences are all about the superhero in that moment. And sure, like if you want to look at the big picture, yeah, it leads towards the goal of the story. But they really dial in on the individual storylines. And they're really good at it. They've got entire teams that are just dedicated to monitoring the development of the story along the timeline to make sure that everything works. And bravo, because they're really good at it. But it's such a visual spectacle, and the story is so visual that I don't get that kind of real team interaction that you get with, I mean, even like what was that stupid, they made a movie about it's called Battleship. Yeah, even that story, which was dumb. Aliens coming and our only hope is to use naval battleships against aliens. But even that one, there was like a very high quality of interaction, like on the bridges of vessels, where they were actually acting like they were operating the machine and working together as a team. And that's actually really hard. I think that's really difficult, is to get that kind of group dialogue, simultaneous dialogue, to be cohesive and to make sense. Star Trek, they're also masters of having a bridge full of characters interacting simultaneously, all doing their jobs. I think the reason that Star Trek appeals to me so much, though, is because so much of it is based upon, even though they take extensive liberties, and that's okay because it's fiction, they still manage to keep it like kind of grounded within physics. Everything's still told from a perspective of like, oh yeah, physics. Oh yeah, chemistry. The dynamics of electromagnetism. And since these are fundamental to the stories themselves, and they only drift so far into hardcore. I mean, it's all hardcore fantasy. It's all super hardcore science. We don't have warp drive. But even though they do that, they still create rules for themselves. And occasionally they bend them because of story. But I think that's what I like about it. Whereas in a lot of fantasy, they just rely on magic. And of course, magic is just science. We don't understand, blah, blah, blah. But I think that gets back to, a lot of hand waving. And that doesn't even reach the level of telling, not showing. Telling, not showing. Or showing, not telling. That's it. One of the two. Now I'm confused. But we see a lot with Marvel. And it's all individual action until the final big team thing, which has so much minutia, you can't really tell what's going on. Like the big battle with Thanos at the end. I had to watch that like 20 times, and I had to pause and rewind just to see all of the details because it's so jam-packed. It's like the fruitcake of battle sequences.
Well, and on that note, it feels like Marvel has a problem with that specific thing, and a lot of the image space is being taken up by beautiful imagery, but nothing that's moving the actual plot forward. Whereas, it doesn't have to even necessarily be background set pieces or Easter eggs or anything like that. But that type of thing has started to go away relative to the early incarnations.
Well, I mean, like, have you seen any of the latest Avatar movie? Did you watch it yet?
No, I haven't seen first, or I'm never going to watch Avatar, to be honest.
Okay, so I tried to watch a portion. I tried to watch some of it with Sheila, and it's beautiful. I mean, it's absolutely beautiful. But there's so much visual information that I'm not. It's like, is the planet a character in this story? I can't tell because there's so much of the planet, but it doesn't really. It's just the set, but there's so much damn detail that it distracts from everything. It's like too detailed. Like if there was an uncanny valley inside the uncanny valley, this is it. It's too much. I guess that's hyper reality. Even then, like there's a point where I guess it's one thing to see a giant rendered landscape because that sets the stage, but then to have all of that detail at every second, that's just unbearable. I think that's why I like outer space science fiction, because there's so much space that even though there's millions of dots of light in front of us, they're all so far away that they're just not near us. So there's room to tell a story.
Yeah, and I do gravitate towards those types of visual experiences, but I'm also of the mind that like there is a point of diminishing returns, like you're saying, in terms of like there can be too much on the screen, and when an entire film experience is based around that overstimulation, and like I imagine watching an Avatar film on a small screen is not the same at all. It's not that I can understand in making an experience, but like I'm not interested in that.
Yeah.
It's just not. interesting to me as a viewer, and then further, like, so much of the story being dependent on that to carry the experience. I'm like, it feels like a novelty or a way to like trick the person viewing it into thinking that it's more prolific than it actually is, which is where, like, you know, I don't like first person horror games because they abuse the jump scare. Yeah. It's like there's certain things about mechanics and biological responses where I'm like, oh yeah, of course, if I get overstimulated with the fucking 120-foot screen and, you know, 100 decibel audio system, yeah, of course my senses are going to be overwhelmed and I'm going to feel like I got like literally blown away because I actually did. And so take those things away, and if the experience is not the same, it's not to say, again, I get it, but I'm not really interested in having my senses used against me to make something seem bigger than it is. And that's where ultimately it's that, like, and I think a lot of people are going to feel the same way about AI. Nobody likes being tricked. And unless you signed up for it, going to a magic show is voluntary, like opening oneself up to being tricked. Whereas if somebody makes art or a song or a book using AI and doesn't tell you, and you're like, oh, I like this thing, and then they're like, oh, well, guess what? AI did that. It doesn't feel good. And this is where, to me, a lot of the Marvel and not all of James Cameron's stuff, but some of his stuff depends upon just tricking the senses, either by making the sounds too loud or making too much information on the screen, into thinking it's like when the body can't process all the information at once, it gets excited. And that excitation can be confused for enjoyment in a way where some people are really good at using that and tricking the body into thinking it's enjoying something. Like, for example, LP, the producer, he's really good at overstimulating the ear into getting to a point where the person listening to a song is like, something about this is good, I don't know what it is, but it's actually because they're being overstimulated and can't focus on any one specific part. And that's its own skill and its own technique, but some people will abuse that into not having to then add substance behind it. Because if you do that and then there's something substantive behind it, it can be a very transformative / spiritual / religious experience. But if there's nothing of substance, they're tricking you into thinking you had a religious experience, and nobody likes that. And that's why I feel like the immediate response to the Avatar, like 3D, when it first came out, was people, oh, this is fucking amazing. But then after the novelty wore off, they're like, actually, there's no real plot here. This plot is just stolen from other movies. And that's where, again, I'm like, you know, I'm never going to watch them because I know what they're doing. And not to say that I'm sure they have their own merit. But this is why, to me, like, I don't want to go to that magic show. I want to go to other magic shows. That one doesn't.
Well, I think James Cameron, you know, like Aliens, I like his treatment, the aesthetic that he applies to Aliens, but it's really the Terminator 2 future aesthetic applied to Aliens. And that's not to say that Terminator isn't in the pantheon of time travel stories, despite being absolutely wrong in terms of quantum mechanics. It's still a very good time travel story continuum. And whereas he created that that universe, and it's an evolving universe where that other people have told stories in, and it still works. I don't think Avatar has that kind of. It's just not. It can never rise to the level of even Terminator in terms of the pantheon of great science fiction. Because, like you said, it's borrowed stories. It's Fern Gully for the most part. And not to say that Fern Gully isn't an enjoyable story, but let me call you back. But, it ain't no Terminator, and it's definitely not an Alien. It's not like it doesn't rise to the level of like Alien 4.
Would you watch it again?
Avatar or Alien 4? I'd totally watch Alien
Avatar.
4. No, I don't want to watch Avatar again.
See, that's perfect point.
But I would totally watch Alien 4 again
Perfect.
because it's a comedy and it's actually funny. It's like the funniest alien story that exists, despite all the gruesome alien evisceration of humans. Like it is straight up the comedy of the series, and it deserves to be treated as a comedy. If you watch it as a comedy, all of a sudden it's great. But it isn't Alien, and nothing is as dark as Alien 3, and Alien 2 is the Terminator version of the Alien universe. So they all have their own place, and even the AVP stuff is actually really good. AVP 2 holds up so well. I watched that not too long ago, and I was thoroughly engaged the entire time because they reference the Ripley character. They reference Kyle Reese's like contributions in Terminator in a way. Like they pull in from so many different science fiction character archetypes that it's just a wild ride. It's really fun. And then the Predator that they create that does the whole like the alien that they have for that story that just is like part Predator. That thing was a fantastic monster. Like almost as cool as like the Queen aliens in terms of like the raw brutality and power that it possessed. It was a really great like big monster for the end of the story. But those are complete story universes that can adapt, and I don't think Avatar will ever reach that at all because it relies too much on full bore stimulation the whole time.
Well, and
also it's not funny. They don't tell jokes in that story. There are no jokes. There's no opportunity. They're all serious all the fucking time. And when they pretend to tell jokes, they're still not funny. Like when they tell jokes, it's like that's bad acting.
Well, and on that note, I'm starting to wonder if jokes are meant to go in things that are longer than like 22 minutes in terms of like a comedy movie is exhausting.
Yeah.
It's really exhausting to be like, oh, I'm going to laugh for like 90 minutes or 2 hours. By the end, it's not just like, obviously it's physically exhausting, but you're mentally like, okay, another joke. Fucking okay, great. And it's like you want to, like you go into it wanting to be entertained, but it's just so long. And it's almost like, I wonder if we are coming to a point where we're like learning that certain things are better in certain formats, and also like in terms of, obviously it's a tool to be used sparingly. Like a comedy film may not have been a great idea. Like the idea of like having an entire film that's meant to be based around comedic effect and funny. It's like, well, then where's the room for the story?
Yeah.
Like, so the notion of a story is why one tends to sit in the same, like, if you're going to watch a movie for 90 minutes or 2 hours, it's because there's an actual story carrying you through. But if the story is dependent or has an onus to deliver laughs at a regular interval over that 90 minutes, then it's really actually making it more difficult to make the story present. Like the Friday series, as it went on, became that. And that's where it's like the story became more disconnected. The jokes became fewer and far between. And it's partially because like it's really hard to carry a joke over, like the longer, everybody can't be David Letterman.
Thank
in terms of, yeah, thank goodness. Even David Letterman is not always David Letterman. Like every long form joke doesn't work, and they're really hard to pull off.
Yeah.
And especially the more themed a joke or the more situational a joke becomes, the better the punchline better be at the final payoff. Because if somebody sits through a fucking 90-minute setup and the punchline ain't there, they're gonna be mad. So this is, you know, I feel like we're learning things about human emotion and the human emotional reaction to things, as to where it's like, you can't have a 3-hour movie with all serious. It has to be some funny, but you can't have 3 hours of funny either.
Exceptional Radio.
Exceptional Rando show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule every Sunday from 2 to 4 p.m. You can catch us live on YouTube, and if I ever post the address to our Icecast stream, which I probably used to do but don't. Anyways, if you have something you'd like to share with us, please reach out, because we'd like to hear it. And thanks for listening.